Hey everyone, my name is Steve, and today I'm going to talk about the issue of executive compensation, but with a twist centered around nonprofit compensation and what is known as overhead. I work as a development director at the United Way of Dane County, so this topic hits very close to my everyday work. That being said, I want to stress that the position I take in this presentation does not reflect the stance of United Way, nor my own personal beliefs. Nonprofits are organizations considered to provide public benefit, therefore they're not taxed. As an entity out to do good in the community, this means that unlike normal corporations, the goal of a nonprofit is not to make money, but to make change in the community. That being said, it is assumed that nonprofits are efficient and responsible with their money, and humble in compensation of staff. After all, nonprofit is not about making money. This is why people were flabbergasted when a report came out showing that some nonprofit CEOs made more than $1 million in annual salary. Furthermore, people were equally shocked to learn about several organizations' overhead ratio, or the amount spent on fundraising and administration, to actual programs in the community. How can a nonprofit be considered responsible when 40% of their budget is spent on overhead? In this presentation, I will address these points and show that not only are public perceptions incorrect in both of these questions, but that both higher executive salaries and higher overhead are needed to do what nonprofits exist to do, make change in the community. The first thing to realize is that nonprofits resemble for-profit business much more than we think. Some of the most successful nonprofits operate in a business manner because both for-profit and nonprofit entities operate in the same environment. They both are trying to acquire consumers' money, either to make a profit or to make a change. A nonprofit's product is the work they do, and their customer is their donor. At the end of the day, nonprofits are delivering value to the lives of their donors. They're meeting the needs of people who want to give back and make the world a better place, but might not have the time or resources needed to do so. The concepts of marketing, brand awareness, and competition all factor into how much a nonprofit can raise, and therefore, how many resources they have to make that change. In Madison alone, there are over 6,000 nonprofits a donor can choose from. Amongst all this noise, how does a nonprofit reach their donor? The answer to that is that they use the same marketing techniques that work for successful for-profit businesses. But just like in for-profit, you have to spend money to bring in money, which runs counter to the concept that lower overhead nonprofits are better. We're all competing for the consumer's resources, so in order to stake claim in the ring, nonprofits have to get their message out in similar ways. Not by low-budget flyers in a coffee shop, but through TV spots, billboards, and magazine ads, especially in a consumerist society where large for-profit entities heavily influence how consumers experience and respond to messaging. The concepts of marketing are like the laws of physics. No one is immune to them. The notion that lower overhead costs reflect better, more efficient nonprofits completely ignores the concept of competition and the scarcity of resources in an economy of consumerism. Focusing on overhead ratio truly does fix the pie, and in order to expand the whole pie, in order to raise more money for programming, that overhead needs to be a larger piece. Nobody would argue that a fundraiser with 5% overhead that brought in $2,000 is better than a fundraiser with a 30% overhead that brought in $2 million. Expanding the pie requires expanding the overhead. This brings us to my next point. Whenever I tell people I work for a nonprofit, they usually respond with, "That's great, but what do you ultimately want to do someday?" I can personally attest to the notion that nonprofit employees don't make much, and I think that this sentiment is what is usually behind the response I normally get. I often think to myself how I don't wish to be working for a nonprofit by the time I have a family, because I wouldn't be able to provide for them nearly as much as I would working in the private sector. In fact, anecdotally, I've seen this very phenomenon happening in my own workplace. 8 of the 16 positions in my department have turned over in the past year, most of these individuals going into the private sector. Nationally, nonprofits are seeing turnover rates around 19%. When surveyed, these individuals cited being underpaid and excessive workloads as their top reasons for leaving. But low wages and higher workloads are exactly what is being demanded of the nonprofit community. Keeping overhead low means decreased wages and stretching employees to make up for this lack of resource. And the same is true of accruing and retaining the talent needed to execute these business-savvy strategies that return higher revenues. Social entrepreneur Dan Pelota makes the following point to illustrate this need. The median income for a Stanford MBA graduate is around $400,000, while a CEO of a hunger charity makes about $84,000. The MBA grad could literally donate half of their salary to the charity and still make more than 2 times what the nonprofit CEO made, while making a large impact in the community. Usually, people find jobs with salaries commensurate to their talent. In the same world where nonprofits compete for resources against for-profits, they also have to compete for talent. It's not fair to assume that the talented people have to have a heart of gold and turn down the potential 4 times higher salary. The IRS guidelines for a nonprofit indicate executive compensation is reasonable and not excessive. So while some might scoff at the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of America earning $1.85 million, They fail to consider these CEOs are typically running multi-million-dollar operations that endeavor to help change the world. In fact, that organization brings in $133 million annually, with around $100 million going into programming. What would the opportunity cost be in instead employing the talent that $84,000 could attract? Opponents might say that any salary at that level is excessive and seems to contradict the nonprofit ideology, and that fundraising costs can be kept low and still be successful. This completely ignores the fact that nonprofits do exist in the same environments as for-profits, which have much larger marketing budgets and salary budgets to attract talent and resources. If society accepts a company spending 12% or tens of millions of its revenue on marketing to create a need for a new fancy car, why would we have a stigma around nonprofits spending more on the talent and marketing needed to create the desire to meet an actual need in society that we will all benefit from? We all say we want a better, safer community for all, but are we willing to put our money where our mouths are? Are we willing to invest more in the talent, the fundraising capabilities of the organizations making real change in our communities? I think the resounding answer is yes, and the first step in making this a reality is reframing how we see nonprofits. Not as nice charity endeavors, but as social investments operating as businesses that require the same standards in order to scale their work to grow.